ICQ Podcast, episode 382, SOTA Mountain Adventure. Well, hello, fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 382nd episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Scott Wright, Kilo Zero Mike Delta, Richard Langmead, 5 Bravo 4 Alpha Juliet Golf, and of course our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin, M1MLB, is joined by Chris, Mike Zero, Tango Charlie Hotel, Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Leslie, Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin, M6BRY, runs up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature enjoying the adventure of activating SOTA Mountains. Well, as always, it's your very kind donations that keep your ICQ podcast show running and paying its way on the internet. This episode, we'd like to thank Scott Wright, Kilo Zero Mike Delta, and he says he's enjoying the feature stories and the independence of the news and analysis. And his donation is also in recognition of the interview and work Frank Howell, our friend Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, done with Scott McIntosh on the solar cycle and the Friedrichshafen coverage by both Chris and Ed Durant. It's an excellent work from all the team, and thanks for covering the material that no other podcast covers. So yeah, you're more than welcome, Scott. It's our aim to, as I say, produce an enjoyable show that everyone enjoys, and we really do appreciate that you found value in the work that the guys have done recently. We'd also like to thank Richard, 5 Bravo 4 Alpha Juliet Golf, and say thank you, Richard, for kindly supporting us in our birthday month here at the ICQ Podcast, and I really hope you enjoy your trip to the UK. Unfortunately, I won't be available to catch up with you this month. I'm on other travels, but I know you'll be catching up with Martin and some of the guys in the Sutton Team group as you catch up with friends, relatives, and family, on your annual trip to the UK. So I really do hope you enjoy that trip, Richard. Now, you can do what Richard and Scott and monthly and subscription donors have done, and that's support the work we do here at the ICQ Podcast. It's a very, very simple concept. If you've enjoyed the show and the work we do, turn that into a monetary figure. Go to icqpodcast.com/donate. See if one of our subscription models or one of our suggested models match that value. But if it doesn't, that's not a problem at all, because you can select your own value and send it our way. And as I say, those donations are always greatly appreciated. Right, well, now we're going to move on with our show, and so hopefully you'll enjoy spending the next hour or so with us as we join Martin, Chris, Frank and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including UK hams can go direct to full and amateur bands to be used for Paris Olympics. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, welcome to episode 382 of the ICQ Podcast, and tonight's News Roundtable for that episode. Tonight, there's only a few of us, but it's still going to be fun, I'm sure of that. Tonight, across the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin and everybody. It's great to be here this week.
Great to have you, mate. And as I say, glad you got over your COVID. I know you've not been feeling particularly too well, but we think about you, Frank, and I appreciate you putting the time in to join us tonight. Also, coming back this side of the pond, I have Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Hi, Frank. Hi, Leslie in the background. And nice to be here.
Yeah, and Leslie, you're not going to be harangued tonight because Bill and Martin are not here, so there's no train whistles and no taking the mickey out of you saying hello. Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Good evening, Martin, and good evening, everybody. The gremlins are playing with my PC something rotten. I just had a major freeze and it decided not to work. So suddenly I drop out. You know what's happened.
Do you know what? I think it is because we record, give secrets away now, but we record on a Wednesday. Microsoft do an update every other Tuesday or something, isn't it? And and it just always hits us on a record.
No, look, Martin, you got it wrong. What it is it's got these sensors. When you're trying to do something important, it goes, we're going to do an update. The whole thing crashes.
Yeah. I've been known to use bad language, Leslie. That would surprise you. Oh, dear. Anyway, let's see what we got. Looking at our first news story, the RSGB has just announced going direct to full license examination syllabus has now been published. I think I can't say it's not a good thing because that's the way Leslie and I did it, although I still think it's worth doing the 3-tier system. And I think it's pretty interesting to see what's going to happen. Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, you're absolutely right, Martin. I mean, I took my exam, early 1980s, something like that, and there used to be a B licence or an A licence. Bottom line is you just took one exam and that was it. And then the Morse tests many years later. I think this is going to suit those that believe, or this is going to suit those that have got a background already and don't need are really competent at the basics, know about voltmeters and ammeters and that type of stuff. They've already got a background and they think that they may have a career in electronics, but there's other stuff that they've got to learn, like the licensing conditions and like antennas and all that type of stuff, propagation, of course. And it's another route. I don't think a lot of people will take this on, but if somebody thinks they've got enough knowledge or background, and then yes, that route is up to them to just take the one exam. Personally, I think the 3-tier system is good. My own preference is for the practical elements, but they're well gone now, especially with COVID, and I think and Frank used an analogy about getting your car license. Once you get your license, and then you start getting, you start learning how to do this, and I think that's a very good analogy. But like I said, if people want to take this route, great. It's entirely up to them.
Yeah. Well, as I say, you and I did it to this route, so we can't really complain too much. Interestingly enough, though, we have in September, I believe it is. Chris will correct me because he sent out the notification, but we are actually doing a practical, the old practicals for anybody who wanted to do them in South London. Now, got to say, there's limited spaces. So if you hear this on Sunday and you want to do it and you live within easy reach of South London, then you may want to consider. Chris, what's your thoughts?
So just on that subject, 11th of September, just to make, not sure when you listen to this, if people listen back on the recordings, 11th of September 2022, we are doing that. So we're going to be going through some of the practical stuff. So if you took your foundation license online through remote invigilation and haven't had to do the practicals, it's well worth coming along to that, because that will show you some things that you won't have necessarily done, and also you get to actually play with some radio stuff and actually get your hands on, so it's good to get a little bit of hands-on experience. Helps, it kind of gives you a bit of confidence, I suppose. But back to my thoughts on this thing, Martin. So I think it's brilliant. I think for people have got anything that gets more people into the hobby, I think it's a good thing. There are people out there that probably think, I've got a degree, or I've worked in RF engineering for 30 years. Why on earth have I got to do a foundation and then intermediate to get the full? And the RSB listened to that and said, yeah, do you know what? That's a good point. So they've now got the option. We must point out, this is not, they haven't gone back to a one-tier system. You've got the choice now. And I seem to recall when we spoke to the RSGB at least a year ago, if not longer, on this subject, they made it very clear that this is only for people that have that level of experience, and they were seeing this as being very much the exception. People that are, haven't got a serious background in electronics or RF engineering really should be following the 3-tier system. Now we'll see what happens. This doesn't start until January next year. So there's a bit of time for people to get used to the idea, but it is very much about people that have that confidence. And as Leslie was just saying there, even if you have got that background, there will still be stuff you have to learn to pass this exam. You will not know necessarily about the legal side of things, like I said, licensing conditions or propagation, that sort of thing. So, but no, I think it's a good thing, and as long as it's the right people that go along for it, we'll have to see, a year or two's time when we see the results, we see the pass rate, how many folks attempt this and how many folks pass it. It'll be interesting to see what the mixture is between that and the traditional or the 3-tier option that people have got. But like I say, the RFW are fully expecting most people to continue along the 3-tier route.
Yeah. Well, I remember we've taught the courses, the foundation, intermediate predominantly, but I remember once having a guy that worked for a local electronics firm that built radar systems and military radios, and he was like, I don't need to learn this stuff. And I said, I've got a degree in this, I don't need to learn this. Fair enough, mate. You sit in the back of the room if you don't want to listen. My role is to teach you the syllabus to get you through the exam. And I was showing a couple of guys, and the question was asked, and I was I try and give people as much information as possible. And this guy suddenly went, I didn't know that. Oh, why did you go that route? And the thing is, we all know lots of different things. Yeah, I was never clever. I couldn't do his job and design military radios, but I can fix them. I'm a fixer, and I've got years of experience of it. So, I think there's much more than just passing the exam. And yeah, when I passed my exam, like everybody, believe it or not, you guys won't believe it, I was tongue-tied when I went on the air. And yeah, I took a bit of hard time, and a few people put me under their wing, and I managed to come out the other end of it. But there's a lot more to it, and I do wonder whether some of these people going straight to full license will not actually go on the air. Frank, what's your thoughts? I know you're over in the States, but I don't think in the States you can go straight to extra, can you?
Yes, you can.
All right.
When I was licensed 11 years ago at Georgia Tech, I was working for the college board for the public university system in Georgia. And I had wanted to be a ham and various things. I think the code got me. I was too busy doing my career to learn the Morse code. And that was a little bit of a barrier that many folks allowed to be a barrier. I chose to do that. And so they had a boot camp. I got my technician license 1 month, and the next month I got my general. And the month I got my general, this young lady came in. She was a teenager. She was a young teenager. She went from beginning to extra, took all 3 exams, passed. So we've had some who have done that at very young age. In any case, so yes, you can do that. I don't know, Martin, how long that's been possible, but you can. And I took my extra when I took my general, and I think I missed 2 more than I needed to pass, and I just haven't taken it since. That's on my to-do list. But let me comment about this, because I think there's been some excellent comments, and we had a little bit of a go in our review of our agenda for today, our news stories. And Leslie mentioned that I would use the analogy, you don't become a good driver of an automobile by just getting your license. You become a good driver by actually driving under different conditions, but you can't legally drive until you get your license. Here in the States, many states have something called a learner's permit, in which you can operate with a fully licensed driver in the vehicle, in the passenger seat. That is probably akin to our get on the air station or any other activity where you've got a control operator. I look at this change from the 2-tier or 3-tier to 2-tier as like a curriculum. If you were doing a degree program in academia, you would identify what needs to be known and how do you organize the training to get there. So this direct to full exam has part 1 and part 2. Part 1 has 18 questions. You must get 14 correct. And they cover things like licensing conditions and station ID, operating practices and procedures. The part 2 has 57 questions. Now, our extra in the States has 50, I think. 57, and you have to get 36 correct, about 62%. And it's got several sections: technical aspects, transmitters and receivers, feeders and antennas, propagation. I only ask 5 questions on propagation: electromagnetic compatibility, safety, and measurements and construction. So it's organized in a fairly coherent way. And we can all have our preferences about whether it should be 2-tier or 3-tier. But as I've listened to the other comments, what it hinges on is what you blokes across the pond tend to call the practicals. And traditionally, I think it's been either one Elmer, usually the guy down the street, could be a woman, but usually a guy down the street that you know, or someone whom one of your parents knows, and they get you together. This one person who's an Elmer, but more likely a club. Moving forward, we have such a mobile and active and busy society. And I'll be doing a blog post on some census data that's just been released about what young people do, their activities, sports and clubs and other activities. And there's some really good data and data over time about that. And so I'll be writing about that at k4fmh.com soon. But the point is, young people have such a busy schedule already today that we can see why it's a challenge to get them into clubs, particularly when we don't go where they are. We simply advertise and say, come to us. I'm going to leave that discussion there. We've got another story that will follow up on this point, but I think the real question that most of us have is they can do this. They might be able to do it online through invigilation, but then are they going to learn how to drive? And I think that question is open. It puts the burden a little bit on clubs. But today we've got so much in the way of online stuff, online meetings and things. Sutton and Cheam Club is doing a lot of online things. Unfortunately, I missed the program here last week. So it's just a different era, I think, from when those of us at our age, if we got licensed early, that condition is fundamentally different from the way young people particularly face it today.
Yeah, interesting, Frank. I'm kind of half worried a little bit about online. YouTube, a great source of information, but it's also a great source of bad information.
Amen.
It's, it's not like...
Martin, can I put it a different way?
Go on.
Right, years ago, there used to be these buildings called libraries.
Yeah.
And they had lots and lots of books. Some of the books were great and some were rubbish. And you sat down and you went through them and thought, that's no good, I don't like that. And the process called research. The internet's exactly the same. You got to sort out the chaff from the good stuff.
Trouble is, the chaff seems to make it to the top.
Martin,
it does.
I've got another comment.
Go on.
You asked the question earlier, in the States, can you go straight to your extra? Well, I know someone on this call that did exactly that. Right. In one session. That's you, Martin.
Yes,
you walked in the door with no American license whatsoever and walked having passed your extra. So, all right, you had to take 3 tests in one sitting, but you did it in one go. And that's the difference between the American and the US systems. I don't believe over here, well, I know you can't turn up at an exam centre and take 3 exams or book an online exam.
All right, I'm a bad man. I can't help it.
That's what I'm saying, is that you can't. That's one of the differences. It's the you need to have booked in advance and all that sort of thing, and you can only take one exam at a time. And we know that the exam I don't think the right word, ethos or cult, not cult, we have the wrong phrase here. Regime, that's probably a better phrase. The exam regime in the States is a lot more relaxed than the exam regime in the UK. When we used to do the exams, and you still can in a hall on paper, then we had to go and make sure the desks were a certain distance apart, and we had to have a clock at the front and say, right, this is the start, so this is the end time, and you had to all that business. It was all very strict, and is all very strict. The US exam regime to me seems a lot more relaxed. If you recall, Martin, you and I sat next to each other, and we weren't that far apart. And at the very start, you had to fill in your name, and you had to fill in the exam number from the front of the sheet, from the front of the exam paper. And you and I were taking the same exam, as in the same level of exam, but actually we were taking different exam papers. So we could have copied each other's answers, and they'd have been completely wrong because we're taking different, we had different questions. So there's definitely a difference in the way that the US exam system works or exam regime works compared to the UK. Now, whether that's better or worse, others can decide that, but that's just sort of point the differences out, really.
Well, as you know, I did go straight to full, Chris, yeah. But in fairness, I was a full licensee in the UK, and I had studied the licensing conditions for the States, which are a lot different to the UK. And if I was to go out to the States again, I'd have to do a refresher on that, I'm sure. However, a lot of the technical stuff was the same as what I'd done. Not all of it, but I found it interesting. But I wasn't coming from nothing to a full license in the States. I was already a full license holder in the UK. And in fairness, the amount of times I've been to the States, I could have just operated under the SEP agreement and not bothered. But it was fun.
But the point is that you can walk in, if you got the relevant knowledge, and you can walk in with nothing and walk out with an extra license in one session.
Yeah, I forgot I did it. Sorry. Sorry, Frank, for asking the question you answer to. Right. Okay, let's move to the next news story. Over there in Norway, they're starting to send traffic messages in APRS, on the APRS map. Now, I thought this was quite interesting. Frank, I know it's not US, but you are somebody who plays with APRS and digital gateways. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a step forward. Now, our listeners will recognize that the father of APRS, Bob Brunenga, became silent key earlier this year. And I think there's probably a broader, he was the godfather, intellectual godfather and leader for APRS. It's been a protocol that's been around for a long time. With Bob's absence now, there's been a group that's gone together to try to not only preserve but protect APRS and enhance it. Norway's NRRL has taken a step, I think, to innovate and include an easier way for traffic messages to be an APRS map service. I think some of the other presenters will talk about weather when they get their turn. And they've got a map, aprs.no, that is easy to access. We've done it in our pre-rehearsal. And I think it's a very much of an innovative thing. One of the things that would go over here in the States, as we say, like hotcakes, is that you can look at images from the Transportation Authority's webcam. Now, for emergency stuff in my previous club, I actually put all of the webcams around the greater Jackson area, which is the capital of the state, on our club's website for the MCOM group to access. And it became a very, very usable item. So as the Norway group has published this and people get familiar with it, other places will want to copy it. I hope it's done here in the States at some point. It might be across the pond in Great Britain, but I'm very, very positive about it I like the APRS.FI, the granddaddy, but also APRSdirect.com. It gives some estimates of the footprint of the digipater. Sometimes it's not always accurate, but it's generally accurate. And Martin, I know you've mentioned that when you've got spotty digipaters, you don't know if your packets are getting picked up or not. So bravo and good on them for this innovation.
Yeah, the only reason I said about there's not as many digit repeaters around as there were back when I started in the hobby. Back when I started in the hobby, APRS was like almost the FT8 of things, and you could send text messages through it. So you could send somebody a text message and it would arrive in their inbox when they were on APRS. You can track vehicles that have got GPSs connected to them. I remember saying to one local amateur at one point in time, mate, if you're going to do 110 down the motorway, turn your APRS off, because that's just proving you've done it. You're illegal. But no, it's one of those things. It was a great thing. The thing I also like about it is a number of people put weather stations up. So if I want to go somewhere, I can very quickly look at the weather station, see what the weather is where I'm going, and make a decision whether I need to take rain clothes or not. So it's a kind of idea. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think APRS is a clever thing. You mentioned some websites there. One I often use is APRS.fi, which is gives you a nice map online. I think it's something that's evolved over the years. But yeah, I was just saying before we started to record, when I went over to Friedrichshafen last month, I took with me my FT3 handheld, which has got a built-in APRS facility, and I was just sat in the campsite outside the sort of day before the main event started, and I could see I was just constantly getting signals through on the in Europe it's 144.8 on 2 meters. I was just constantly getting messages through about people's locations. So I think it is actually used quite a bit, and like you say, it's not just for positional radar data. It's like you say, weather data. People can attach weather stations and link that up to APRS, which is quite interesting, as you were saying, Martin. And yeah, this is a new thing. People are starting to do traffic reports, and yeah, why not? Why not do this? It's I mean, we all know there are other ways to do this stuff now. We all know that you can send your location via your phone to WhatsApp or something, or other way. There are Google Maps can do that sort of thing, but we like to do it using radio, and we know that we're not relying on somebody else particularly to, I can send a signal directly to somebody, and I'm not relying on the internet or somebody else to help to do that. So I still think it's valid, and I still think it would work. And when all that stuff stops working, we all know that, for example, APRS is often used, I know, as part of emergency comms, whether it's, or maybe just or kind of rain type activities or ARRS, that sort of thing, because they want to be able to send location data, and that can be quite useful. So yeah, I think it's very relevant. I think it's it's nice to see that people are actually developing it and using it for new stuff. So traffic information, I think, is a good one.
Yeah, well, having worked in the commercial side of radio, albeit a good few years ago, I used to get the various reps and that come in and say, "Oh, we can do tracking, and we can do this, and we can track people where they are, and we can work out this, that, and the other." And I look at them and go, "Oh, you're just talking about APRS." And I go, "You're an amateur, aren't you? God, you know about that stuff." And most of it is very, very similar. They've just done what is an APRS kind of copy, or certainly in the early days. The other thing is, you can also often see the ISS go over, and it's marked up as ISS. It looks like a satellite going over, and you can tell it's the ISS because if you click on it, it says it's travelling at 17,000 miles an hour. So it's fun to watch sometimes. Leslie, I know you haven't played with this, and it is predominantly a VHF, UHF thing, but do you see any advantages or interest in this?
I must apologise, Martin. The Gremlins have been working there. They've got it in for me tonight, and that this PC's already crashed twice while you've all been chatting away, and I've frantically come back. Like as you said, I haven't got any experience on APRS, so I've really sort of been listening. But I've got this box that's faulty. I'm pulling my hair out of this at the moment. APRS for another day.
It's a great one, Leslie. It's worth having a look, and it's like everything. You know, our hobby's massive. You can't be involved in every part of it. But I think it's
there is so much. It's such a breadth of technical things you can get involved in, and that's one of the beauties of the hobby.
It certainly is. Certainly is there. Right, let's move to our next news story. I'm going to pass this one to Frank first again, because it's an American story. Frank, the ARRL National Program for School Teachers is happening. Is it something that is useful in the States, or is it any feelings on how well use it is?
Yeah, it's been around for a while, a number of years. I'd say at least a decade, maybe more. And they do it well, as our story says. Now, this is a story about an individual ham, Gabe Oberlin, KAPHP, for the computer programmers out there who manage websites. They'll love that call sign, PHP. The story's about him. And it's about the package of benefits that he gets. All expenses are paid for by the league. They're given a significant package of supplies and books, all this kind of thing. They go up there. I've seen some of the ARRL website public relations about them out looking at the antennas there at W1AW and that kind of thing. It's done well. This particular teacher got a grant to get supplies to participate in his local school's drone program. So you're doing radio control drones. So having said that, I liken it to, it's a great program, but we don't have much in the way of ARRL telling us what the footprint's been. In other words, it's like a screwdriver antenna. It will work. I don't know that 10% efficiency is the number to apply to this, but it would be great, since this has been a decade or more long program, if ARRL did a little evaluation of it. How many teachers have been in this program? Where are they at on a map? I mean, show where they are, and have they followed up with the teachers to see, did they get a station in a school? How many students? There's that next level. And that's what I would like to see from an aspirational point of view from somebody who's done evaluation research, because that way we've got a much better track on it. Is it better than nothing? Oh, you bet it's better than nothing. How much better, and what are some complementary alternatives, such as linking local clubs with public libraries in addition to this? That would be a question I would raise. But good on them for doing it, and I'm glad that Mr. Oberlin was able to travel there and benefit from this.
Yeah, I hope it's of use, because getting teachers involved means hopefully we get students involved in schools. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
I've been listening to interest on this particular topic. I think in the UK we do have that there's certain issues with child protection we have to be careful of in the UK. However, that aside, I do think one of the teachers' roles is to inspire and to sort of set the spark and get the interest, and the students can run with that. And this is about inspiring youngsters, and in the hobby itself. I do allude to what Frank is saying, that yes, we've got this on the teacher side, we're involved with the students, which is great. But when you're spending money, you've got to show the value for the money, what the outcomes are per what you're spending. And I know people cringe at that type of stuff, But if you can show that, you can show whether it's effective or not. Key performance indicators, that's the speak they use, and I think a bit more work needs to be done on that particular area. So,
when you show that, Leslie, you have people who want to give even more money to support it if you show it's effective.
Correct, absolutely correct.
I think what you're saying, boys, is we need a bit of transparency here of what's gone on and how well it's been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, kind of echoing what the guys said. I mean, I think it's good that we've got this happening in terms of we've got a teacher here who has now had some training in trying to promote what we do, which is great. But you have to sort of wonder, one teacher in the whole of the US doesn't seem like an awful lot of how much impact can that investment have, I suppose. So, are there more effective ways? I don't know what it cost. I don't think that's on here, but yeah, I mean, are there more effective ways to do this that would perhaps be more cost effective and have a, as you were saying, bigger bang for buck?
Yeah, as I say, be worth interestingly knowing some of this and seeing what's going on. Right, move to our next news story. For those of us in the UK, we suffered this pain in 2012, but the Olympics are happening in France in 2024, and it looks like they want to recover temporarily some of the 2 metre band and 70 SEMS band for PMR usage during the Olympics. Now, it isn't going to affect most people outside of France. It could affect some people down on the UK coastline near France, but interesting one. Chris, we had this ourselves, didn't we?
We did, but I mean, this was 10 years ago now, 2012, when we had the London Olympics, and we did lose part of the 70 centimetre band, didn't we? I think for that we had to. I do recall that our local repeater at the time, GB3NS, had to change frequencies. I've done a bit of a change back actually, but it didn't really matter. So we had to reprogram our radios to use the new frequencies, etc. But I don't think it's a major hardship. Now, this is also affecting 2 metres. 2 metre band's not as wide as 70 centimetres, but and it's also affecting some other bands as well. I don't think it's a major issue. I mean, let's be brutally honest. How much of the band do we actually use? It's very, maybe not rare, but it's rare for the band to be chock-a-block. It's rare for the band to be wall-to-wall signals. Now, yeah, okay, if there's a lift on or something and your propagation's working well, then this is unusual. Then we may be hearing signals from further afield, but it isn't that common for the 2 metre band to be fully occupied. I think there is, as long as they're not taking it. I don't think they're taking over the whole of the band, are they? They're just taking over a portion of it. Or have I got that wrong?
We're not sure at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I get if they were taking over the whole of the band, then that might be a problem. But if they just say we want half of it or something, then I'm sure we can share. Because I think it's important. We know the Olympics is a huge thing. We're going to have, well, certainly when they did it in London, and it'll be the same in France. They're going to have people there from all over the world. There's a huge need for RF spectrum, frankly, to support that. And yeah, if it's going to be for a short period of time, then I think that's what we have to do. We know in London, normal times. And you know this, Mark, because you used to work in this industry. To get one frequency was, virtually impossible. So they got to do something, unfortunately, to free up some spectrum for this to happen. It's only a temporary thing. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Yeah,
well, I can imagine our Edmund on the south coast with France just across the water thinking, God, the band's live, oh, damn, it's the Olympics. But, I see, it'd be interesting to see how he goes. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
I remember many, many years ago at my local club, the radio amateurs went into major grumble mode over this. Oh, God. Oh, really, really. But anyway, look, guys, it's only temporary. It's not going to last very long. And when it's all over, there'll be lots of radios on the second-hand market. So I wouldn't worry about it. Not a problem.
No. Hopefully it won't be too much of a problem. But there you go. Frank, I know it ain't going to affect you because you're too far away for 2 meters 77 traffic from France. But any thoughts on this one?
Well, they're also using 1.2 gigahertz. And that allocation in France is on a secondary basis. So, we just have to accept that. They're also using 2.3 gigahertz, and it's on a secondary basis, and they are using that for mobile links there. So those two bands, hams really don't have a leg to stand on, especially since it's, temporary. Frankly, if it were me and I were there and I were in a leadership position in France, I would say, okay, great. How can we help you with your communications? Can we be of service? Do you need training on your communications for the Olympic officials? And I think Edmund hit the nail on the head. We're going to get some equipment back on the second hand market here once the thing is over. So I think it's better, given that it's done, you're not going to stop it. Make friends with them, and if you can help out, that's good. I have volunteered to be a course official for a local PGA golf tournament here in the Jackson area. And as it turned out, there were 2 different frequencies being used, and they only gave me a radio for each one, only because they said, who knows how to operate this other radio? Well, being a ham, I said, I can figure it out. So I had an earpiece for each radio in each ear, and I was on hole 16, and a fan got hit by a tee shot. And the medical people and the hole marshals could not coordinate. So I just happened to be about a quarter of a mile away, but I'm the one who managed the communications for them to get the doctor to the fan. My point in all that is offering to help them rather than having our lips pooched out and being mad might be the better play.
Frank, you are absolutely right, and I know one person actually did that at the Olympics. When the radios came in the evening, his job was to make sure they're all working, any faults, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, so we can be of use if required, and any chance to play radio is always fun, isn't it? So, maybe let's see how it all pans out. All right, moving to our last news story, and it's about radio hams to operate from a hot air balloon. Now, this is in Belgium. Chris, I'm going to go to you again first on this one. You and I had a chat with a nice gentleman in Ireland at Frieshaven, an Irish gentleman at Frieshaven, about 7 years ago now, I think you said. Unfortunately, he's a silent key, but he was big into this, wasn't he?
Yeah, Aidan EI5HW. I remember Aidan very well when we interviewed him. HW, he told us sort of a hot whiskey, and he was very big into ballooning and amateur radio, and I think he had a special license that allowed him to do that. Sadly, Aidan is now silent key, but he was very passionate about that, and the interview is still on our YouTube channel. But yes, certainly in Ireland, that seemed to be allowed. I don't know what the legalities of operating a hot air balloon would be here in the UK, but certainly in other parts of the world, it seems to be fine. And of course, a handheld will be fine up there because you got a huge, you're up in the air and nothing's in the way. You're going to get great line of sight all over the place. So this looks like it could be interesting. I don't quite know how, you can predict where a hot air balloon is going to go. I don't suppose you've got much in the way of, apart from the winds taking. I mean, I don't know anything about hot air ballooning. I guess it takes you in a certain direction based on the wind. So it just talk about at the time it's going to be up in the air there. It also says they're going to be beaconing on APRS, so you'll be able to see where they are based on that, which is another nice tie-in to what we were chatting about earlier. So it looks like an interesting one. And if you happen to be in Belgium, then this could be a good one.
Yeah, well, 2 things I remember about Aidan's interview with the time we spent with him. One was him telling me he loved to get to about 2,500 feet and then wake up half the repeaters in the UK. He said that was great fun. He called for them. They'd love to work UK repeaters from in the middle of Ireland. That was that. And secondly, his call sign HW for hot whiskey. The only way I could get an interview with this guy was if I had a whiskey with him after the interview. Now the interview finished at 10 in the morning, and I did honour my that I would have one with him. But it was a bit early for me, honestly. But hey, I got the interview. So there you go. Frank, what's your thoughts?
Well, I just want to point out to eliminate any confusion amongst our U.S. listeners, this is not hot air as in some of the nets and some of the groups on 75-meter phone at night. This is actually a ham in Belgium in a hot air balloon. So just want to eliminate any confusion. But I'm intrigued with this. I just think it would be a lot of fun. I've not been up in a hot air balloon before, but I have wanted to take a helium balloon with a winch and some nylon cord and run it up in the air and tie a couple of bale thongs that would be cross-banded with the output on the simplex frequency on 2 meters and just see who I could reach, with it being up that far, just with the little HT. Haven't done that yet, but I say good on them, and I think it's good to publicize this and just see on APRS particularly how we follow it. A well-known U.S. ham, Randy K7AGE, who's been on Ham Nation quite a bit. Randy goes from Oregon to an air show that involves ham radio. The ARRL has a booth there in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And he's there now. And the last 2 years, what I've started doing when Randy leaves, and he pulls a trailer, he's got a small trailer and a big truck, and he has his ham radio in the trailer, and it takes a couple of nights, and he'll stop and get on the air and this kind of thing. But I've followed Randy with APRS, but then use Google Street View in APRS, and you can see the road as he sees it. And I've tweeted that out, and there have been a few other hams that would follow that link, which would take you directly to Randy's traveling in Street View, and you kind of see what Randy sees. And that's just been kind of fun, just to have a jolly time on it. And I think there's some possibilities with this because we have a lot of hot air balloon festivals in the States, one incredible one in New Mexico. So I enjoyed the story.
Yeah, well, Frank, if you ever get a chance, if you ever get offered to go up in a hot air balloon, take it. It's well worth a trip. Often, they only fly about 25% of the times it's booked because they have to work out which way the wind's blowing and all those sort of things and the weather conditions before they'll go. So you'll get, if you're booked to go, you'll get quite a few cancellations, and then when you go, it is well worth it.
I will take my HT with me if I do that.
I would suggest that would be a good one. Now, I know Leslie's a HF operator. I suppose you could do HF from a balloon, but I worry about that trailing counterpoises, catching electric pylons and things like that, Leslie.
Well, I seem to recall now that listeners will probably jump up in the up and down about this because I know what they're like about licensing conditions. There was some guidance produced by Ofcom, and I don't believe that we're allowed to do it anymore. I think that our license says we can't, but I would need to check up on that. Now, what else was there? Our trailing antennas. Well, many, many, many years ago, we were doing a long wire up into the air, and it's a place called Carroll's Farm, which is in Essex, and there's a helicopter site, and we were within the boundary level. They specified if you're within a certain distance, you have to contact them and let them know what you were doing, which we duly did. And the old helicopter came over and sort of avoided our wire, landed, and then the rather irate pilot come over, and blah, blah, and then he came over and said, well, this is a danger and all the rest of it. And we go, yes, but we got permission from your boss, and here's the letter. And the letter was apparently put on the notice board, but he didn't see it. So that was my story on that particular caper. But yeah, it all ended on amicable terms. But if you're near any sort of airports, you've got to inform people what you're doing.
Yeah, I remember the Wimbledon Club used to have their camp at the back of Chessington Zoo. For those of you in the UK, big field at the back, and they were flying a kite antenna at one point in time, and the police helicopter came over and went, no, boys. It landed, went, no, boys, you're too high. You're flying it too high in this area. You're not allowed to go above 150 feet or so.
Oh, anything to do with the aviation, you must check your regs.
Yeah. And you're right, we're not allowed to do aeronautical mobile. So you're dead right on that, Leslie. But, hey, other parts of the world you can. And, as I say, shame I hadn't done aeronautical mobile, but have been up in a hot air balloon, and that is well worth a trip. Right, well, that's the end of our news stories. Let's find out what the guys have been up to since we last spoke. I'm going to work backwards across my list. So, Frank, what have you been up to?
Well, as we announced previously, I had COVID earlier. I got over the COVID in 4 days thanks to being vaccinated, boosted, and the drug Paxlovid. But I had a neuromuscular attack from the COVID virus in my left shoulder. It was excruciating pain. It put me in an emergency room at midnight. And after some morphine and some other good drugs, I finally got to sleep about 3, and my wife took me back home. That forced an MRI to see what was going on. The MRI doesn't pick up on neuromuscular things. An EMG test does that, but I do have a bulging disc, as many people my age do, and that's pinching a nerve. I've been in physical therapy for several weeks and on some medication for the pain, so I can usually get a decent night's sleep. I thought I would have been in surgery by now, but my neurosurgeon went on holiday to Alaska for 3 weeks. His son graduated from school, and that was a graduation present. So I won't get to see him until August 31st. So I'll likely have disc surgery, I hope, by the end of September. So I've tried to use that time as I could. I went through my shack and my workbench to identify radios and other equipment that I'm just going to cry uncle on and say, hey, that project's not going to work. I'm never going to do that. I don't use that radio, whatever. And I got together quite a bit of equipment. Everything but my venerable Swan 500CX system has sold, although I think it will soon. And I was able to get quite a bit of money for that. So I've turned that money into some new equipment. I bought a couple of QRP amplifiers, which is a misnomer, I guess, to use with my IC705. I also bought a used Flex 1500 QRP SDR. Back in the days of the Flex 3000 and 5000, they had a QRP radio. It's just a small little box, and I found one for a very good price on eBay from another ham, and I got it, and it works beautifully. And that and my 705 can be used to drive the Elecraft KXPA 100 QRP amplifier. Flex said it'll be about 6 weeks before they'll be able to ship that due to their part shortages. But I also got an REM Italy HLA 305V QRP amp that'll put out up to 250 watts. Now, Adam Farson up in Canada, who's a well-known engineer, not as well-known as Rob Sherwood, but he does the same kind of thing that Rob does. He has a white paper on that HLA 305. Many listeners will remember RM Italy as, that's that Italian CB radio amplifier company. And yes, they did begin their career with that market, but they've had FCC type accepted amplifiers here in the States for some time. And Adam Farson gives the 305V a very clean bill of health. And final piece that I purchased, our friend Scott Wright, K0MD, recommended that I acquire an Array Solutions bandpass filter system. So I've ordered that and hadn't come in. Martin, I did figure out that I can get some help from people to pack up stuff I'm going to sell. But after the money's come in, it just takes one hand and one finger to push the buy it now button. And that wasn't very painful.
It's Frank when it arrives, though.
Well, yeah, I did get some help opening up the RM Italy amp. It's a big one. But I have tried to use the time wise. I can only put maybe a couple of hours in a seat before I have to get up and walk around a bit. But I'll make it and I'll get better. And my neurosurgeon's dealing with people who have brain aneurysms and their life is in jeopardy, and I'm just in pain, so I'll make it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're going to make it, and hopefully the pain they'll sort you out fairly soon, Frank, on that one. But it does sound like you've been very, very busy. Put me to shame, I think, Frank, is what I'm going to tell you. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Well, Martin, I've not been on the amateur radio front, that is. They've not been involved in very much because it's absolutely chock-a-block work-wise. But slowly getting involved, taking up a couple of Frank's points. I think the equipment, Radio Shacks are like a thing called a TARDIS. The volume of the equipment is actually greater than the space in the room. Now, I don't understand how it does it, but it does. And the joys of well-known auction sites, I know exactly what happens. The money comes in and oh yeah, that's good. How can we cure this? We can't. So. But anyway, that's what I've been pottering about with.
Yeah, sounds good, mate. Sounds good. Well, as I say, yeah. All in all, it sounds like the pair have been having fun. Chris, you are back with us, having travelled halfway around Europe the last 6 weeks or so. So I know you've got probably a fair amount to tell us.
Well, I have, but that's the feature, so I'm not going to go into that now, otherwise I'll spoil it. So if you can hang on a few minutes until we finish our little chat, you'll hear a bit more detail on that. Other things, we had our club meeting last week, and we have a great talk by Steve White, G3ZVW, who was talking about his amateur radio activities on Ascension Island, which was quite interesting. Very interesting, actually, so that was good. And he's coming back to do another talk for us next year, which will be good as well. We've got SSB, same things coming up. We've got, we now seem to be in rally season. Although I've not been to a rally yet. I know, Martin, you've been to one and you're perhaps planning to go to one this weekend, and I may join you, actually. Just to the details on that one. We've also got SSB Field Day coming up in about a month's time. We need to start planning for that quite soon. So that's kind of on the horizon. But no, most of what I've been doing has been me being off work for 6 weeks and going off my camper van, and you'll hear about that very shortly.
Yeah, well, as I say, I know you've had some great fun. Right, what have I been up to? Well, you're right, I've been to a couple of rallies. I think I've already told you I did Michael rally over in Reading, and I did Newbury about 4 weeks ago, so people will be aware of that. I did make myself another 20-metre MFED antenna that was published in the Sprat magazine many moons ago, and it's basically a half wave with a little L match at the end. It's good for about 20 watts and connects you up to me 817 running 5 watts. Once I tuned the L match up, it was great. Put a call out, called a guy that was calling CQ, went back to him. He was in Belarus, which is a fair trek for 5 watts from my house, and he gave me a 5 and 3. He said, yeah, 5 and 3, but I can work you perfectly okay what you're running. So when I told him 5 watts on a wire antenna, he was amazed. But hey, that's what amateur radio is about. The following day, I don't do much operating because I'm usually busy doing other things. Following day, I thought, let's give this little antenna a go, and 20 metres was dead. Bearing in mind this is a resonant 20-metre antenna. So I went, okay, let's get down to 40 metres. So I went down to 40 metres, plugged my little Ellicraft auto tuner in, and that thing will tune up pretty much a bit of wet string. It's a really good auto tuner. And I used the auto tuner, tuned up on 40 metres, and I worked a guy in Birmingham. Well, okay, Birmingham's not that far. It's about 100 miles from my house. I had a 20-metre antenna set up for 40 metres. I was running 5 watt. The guy gave me a 5 and 3. Then he asked me, he said, you're a bit weak. So he then starts quizzing me, and I told him what the setup was. And he said, I don't believe it. I shouldn't be able to work you. I really shouldn't be able to work you. Now, I think he was doing all the work because he was running 400 watts and he had stacked Yagis. And I was running five into a non-resident antenna. So, hey, bit of fun, but enjoyed myself. What else been up to? I've been fitting a dash cam into the good lady's car, which has gone in quite well. I don't like to have all the wires showing, so I had to spend ages tucking it behind various bits and pieces to run the wires. Also, as I told the guys earlier, I run the power lead in for my mobile rig, but that's another story. That's hidden under the driver's seat at the moment because Mrs. B's not that happy about me putting a radio in the car. But hey, now we're down to one car. I've got to have a radio in the car, haven't I also made up another of various leads. Now, a little tip. Unfortunately, I was lucky that I had a 6-pin DIN connector. A 6-pin DIN socket, but it was one of the line sockets, so it wasn't a chassis mount, it was a line socket. And when I was soldering on one of the wires, the end dropped off, it snapped. And I thought, oh dear, this is the only one of these I got, and I started to worry. Then I realised I got some chassis mount DIN connectors, and if you're very careful and give the pin a fraction of a turn, they drop out, and I've just pushed it back into the line connector, fraction of a turn to lock it into place, and it worked. So I was able to cannibalise a 5-pin chassis socket to fix a 6-pin socket, if that makes sense. But it worked. I spent a reasonable amount of time on 4270, both analog and digital. I really enjoyed that. As I say, went to McMichael Rally a couple of weeks ago when the last podcast came out. Well, that was great. Thoroughly enjoyed that. We also, I'm going to be at the Grand Day Out in Ashford in Kent on Sunday morning when this podcast released. So unless you're local, you probably won't make it there. But I have spoke about this a couple of times on previous podcasts. So, yeah, I'll have done 3 rallies in this month, so by Sunday, so I'm quite pleased about that. I'm also planning to do the flight refueling rally in the 14th of August, and we'll run down there, but that is subject to weather. That's an outside rally, and if it rains, it's miserable. So if it rains, I won't go. If it's dry, then Carol and I will go down to that rally. We'll have a wander around, enjoy it, and then we'll stop off at Carol's Brothers on the way back in Southampton. So it's a bit of a long day, but it's worth doing. So that's what I've been up to, guys. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight. And as I say, I'll then carry on with the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FM8.
Thanks for inviting me. Glad to have it. Glad to have the invitation, and always enjoy this group.
Yeah, Frank, we always enjoy your company as well. So, as I say, I've mentioned to lots of people, we're like a big family here. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield at G0CIB.
Thanks for inviting me on tonight, Martin, and apologies about the gremlins. I seem to have tracked it down to where the fault is.
Right. Well, I told you to stop dunking your microphone in the tea, but I mean,
Old habits die hard.
Yeah. Anyway, Yeah, thanks, Leslie. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Thank you, guys. Another interesting and entertaining episode. Absolutely.
Okay, all that's left for me to say 73s, and we'll continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. Just like to start off here with a note from Gareth Eyre, Golf Zero, Mike Foxtrot Romeo. And he says, could we give a shout out to the Flight Refuelling Amateur Radio Society Hamfest in Wimborne, Dorset, which is back this August after being hiatus for the pandemic. It's on the 14th of August between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Loads of vendors have been booked. There's a newly painted and refurbished clubhouse, and all 4 shacks will be open, and it'll be great to have everybody back supporting the event. So there's a possibility that, some ICQ presenters may be trying to make this one as well. So say if you're in the Dorset area for this very popular Hamfest in Wimborne, Dorset, it would be great for you to pop along and support the guys there. Now, this weekend is the start of the Commonwealth Games, and amateurs are doing their part to celebrate this event by activating special event call station GB22HQ. It's been activated from the Birmingham Smithfield site, where events such as beach volleyball, 3x3 basketball and wheelchair basketball will take place. It's also the starting point for the marathon as well in the athletics. So it's going to be on air for the duration of games, which is up until the 8th of August. And as I say, there's 2 stations using wire aerials for 40 metres and 30 metres, plus a Yagi for the 5 bands from 20 metres down to 10. And during the first day of operation, station was on the 10 to 40 metre bands, and pile-ups were evident, and that first day of operation, as I say, was Friday the 29th of July. So we'll pop a link on the ICQ podcast webpage for more information of how you can get involved from there. In Denmark, it's been noted by the Amateur Radio Society, the EDR, of the problem with the availability of training courses, and suggests that, as I say, as many as 50% who pass the exams and never become active. So the board are trying to work through a list of problems and try and work out ways of supporting local clubs and branches. I say that they're to resolve this issue of, say, lack of courses and lack of actual active people getting on the air. And so they're saying that the problem, part of the problem will be solved by virtual joint teaching, but getting more branches together and working together, etc. But it's just a start, and as I say, they're worried about losing far too many amateurs in the hobby, as I say, in Denmark. So we're going to put a link to the text that the board said, and it could be some interesting thoughts and feelings if you're struggling with this same problem in your area. But as I say, at the same time, I'm sure they'll also welcome any feedback from any amateur that can possibly help them out as well. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode. In this feature, Chris Howard, Mike Zero, Tango Charlie Hotel. As I say, he discusses his adventures activating SOTA Mountains. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hi there, it's Chris M0TCH here, and this feature is about a trip that I recently went on, quite a long trip actually. So the company that I work for allows us, after 20 years of service, to take a 6-week paid holiday. So I've been in the company now 23 years, so I thought it was time that I got this booked in. So I'd originally done this and planned it in for 2021, but of course COVID was still ongoing, and I decided to postpone it until 2022. So I'd already bought a camper van, and my plan was to use the camper van to travel around. I wanted to make the most of my time. I could have just stayed at home for 6 weeks, but that would have been quite boring. So I set myself a challenge. I decided that I wanted to, at the very minimum, I wanted to go and climb the three highest mountains in England, Scotland and Wales. So those are England, you've got a mountain called Scafell Pike. Scotland, you've got the mountain called Ben Nevis, and that's also the highest mountain in the whole of the UK. And also Snowdon, which is the highest mountain in Wales. And being an amateur radio operator, I thought, well, I'm also going to try and work SOTA, try and work each of those because they're all SOTA summits. And alongside that, I had to work around the Friedrichshafen event because that happens in the middle of June. So I also planned in to be there as well. So I had a big spreadsheet and I figured out my dates. And my plan was to go to Wales first, to go up Snowdon, and then go across to the Lake District, which is where Scafell Pike is. Then I would come home and go over to Germany, come back, and then go to Scotland and do Ben Nevis. So that was the rough plan. I booked a few campsites online, so I had certainly the first few weeks already booked. My plan for Germany was to go through the Channel Tunnel, so that was the plan. That was also booked. So essentially set off to Wales, and I actually also booked to take the slightly unconventional route of going up quite a steep ridge called Cribgoch, and it's quite spectacular. If you can Google it and see the photographs, it's also quite scary because it's quite a big drop off either side. So I decided that rather than just take the usual kind of established path, I would take this other route, which most people don't do. So to do that, though, for safety and just to make sure I didn't get lost, I went with a guide. So I booked in a guide and arrived quite close to Snowdon. Stayed in a campsite there for the night in the camper van. And then the next morning met up with the guide and headed up Cribgoch. And it took about 2 hours to get to the very start of this ridge. And it's lots of scrambling, and it wasn't a straightforward walk at all. It was quite some parts of it were actually climbing up rock faces and that sort of thing, but nothing too serious, just some fairly basic things. But I'm quite a beginner at these things, so for me that was quite a new thing. So I had lots of expert guidance from my guide. Anyway, it gets to the North Ridge, which is the very start of the Cribgoch Ridge. And my guide Dave said, "Have you seen your boot?" And I looked down, and the entire sole of my right boot was hanging off. And of course, that's quite important to have a good grip. It was actually quite a wet day and also a very windy day. So it was already a little bit scary, and obviously you're very high up, and we both decided it wasn't a very good idea for me to continue up along this ridge. It would have been probably quite dangerous, and I probably would have ended up slipping and falling, and that would have been pretty bad. So we decided to follow the route back. Now, of course, climbing down rock faces that when you haven't got a boot with any grip on it is a little bit scary. So Dave, my guide, managed to find a route which didn't involve any of that. It was still some pretty steep slopes, but managed to avoid any scrambling down, which was good. But it did still take a good long time. It was 2 or 3 hours to get back down to the bottom, but it was very glad to get there, safely. I was taking it very easy because I didn't have any grip on my right boot. In fact, by the time I got to the bottom, weirdly, the right boot sole had also completely come off. Now, when I set off, my boots looked perfectly fine. And when I looked into this, it's something called hydrolysis. And it turns out if you've got an old pair of boots, the foam layer between the bottom of the kind of boot part of it and the sole, that can disintegrate, and when it gets, especially if it gets wet. And what happened was these boots, when I actually thought about it, were actually about 13 years old. They were quite good quality boots. They weren't cheap, but clearly everything's got a shelf life, and these had gone past their best before date. So that was not so good, but thankfully, and with a bit of help from Dave, my guide, I got down safely. So that was my first attempt to go up Snowdon. Now, thankfully, in my camper van, I had a spare pair of boots. So the next day, still wanting to go to the top, and I had been to the top actually before, about 12 years before. In fact, it was actually exactly 12 years before, because my Facebook memories came up that day saying, "Look where you were 12 years ago." So that was quite weird that I'd done it to the exact day 12 years before. But I got the spare boots on, and I took the conventional path. Now, to get up Snowdon, there are two paths you can, in fact, the number of paths you can take, but most people take a path called the pig track, which is PYG. Not sure why it's called that. I'm sure someone will know. And that's a straightforward track that you walk up, and it's pretty steep, but it is pretty well established. You can't really get too lost because you are essentially following a track, and it's also quite busy. Lots of other people as well doing it at the same time. So I took the track up there. It was quite a windy day. The rain, there was no rain the second day I was there, but it was pretty windy, and I think it took about 3 hours to get to the top. Now I'm quite strict when it comes to equipment for safety, so I was carrying the right stuff. I had my first aid kit, food, a map, a torch, a compass, and in fact there's also nowadays you can actually get the maps now on your phone, so I also had the map. There's an OS map app for Android, I presume it's the same as well for Apple, so you can actually now buy the maps. In fact, when you buy the maps now from Ordnance Survey, which is the UK people that make maps for walking, you can actually download those to your phone as well. So I was actually using that because that's quite a nice. It shows you precisely where you are, and you can actually set a track, and it will track. You can see where you've gone, that sort of thing. But we all know that phones can sometimes go wrong. Your battery can go flat, or you can have a problem. It can crash, etc. So I also had the paper version as well, and the compass. So I was covered from that perspective. Also carrying things like I say, first aid kits, and a survival bag, which is a big orange plastic polythene bag that you can use if you have a problem. You can get inside that, and it will keep you dry and hopefully keep you warm. So I made sure I had all that with me. I followed the path to the top, and like I say, it was about 3 hours to get to the top. And just as I was approaching the summit, well, I was probably about 5 minutes away from the summit, I switched on my handheld radio. Now, I had taken with me, not up the top this time, but I'd taken with me in the camper van my Elecraft KX3, a link dipole aerial, a fishing pole, and a battery, all the usual stuff to work HF. But I decided actually I wasn't going to bother with HF for Snowdon. I was just going to go up there with the handheld and just see how I got on, because that's quite a lot to carry, and it's quite a lot of effort to get up there, especially on your own with that amount of equipment. So I thought, well, I'll sort of chance it, take the handheld and just see how I get on. So I had my Yaesu FT3D handheld, but anyway, got to the top, and just as I was kind of 5 minutes from the summit, I put the radio on, and I immediately heard somebody else calling CQ SOTA. So, oh blimey, well that's good. That's potentially a summit-to-summit contact. So I actually very quickly went back to him to say, look, I'm not quite at the top, but I'm on Snowdon, so I'll call you back shortly. So I did that, and then as I sort of finished the walk up to the summit, up to the trig point, I heard him work a few of the stations. I then, when I got to the top, worked him. So then I had a summit to summit in the bag, and then managed to work 6 of the contacts on 2 meters. So I was 6 contacts in total. Sorry, so I was quite pleased with that. I'd managed to activate Snowdon. You only need 4 contacts to activate it, and that included 1 summit to summit with another SOTA summit, and also one of the other contacts was actually on a HEMA summit as well. So that was quite pleasing. I managed to activate it. I had my little notepad there, so I wrote all the call signs down and the times and all that sort of thing. So that was really good. And then made my way down, and that was Snowdon. So that was quite successful. It was, however, at the top pretty windy, and it's actually quite surprising just how different the weather can be at the bottom to the top. The top was certainly a lot windier and a lot colder than the bottom of the mountain. So you do need to have the right clothing and the right... mainly the right clothing, I suppose. So I had a windproof jacket, I had my waterproofs, had all that stuff as well in the backpack, and you certainly need some of that stuff because it can be very different at the top, and things like gloves as well. So that was Snowdon. I made my way down, and then I spent a bit of time in Wales. I did a bit of travelling around a bit further south in Wales, and then my next summit was Scafell Pike in the Lake District. So I drove north, and got to the Lake District. Lake District has got that name because it's full of lakes. Now, I've not been there before, actually. I think it's the first time I've been to Lake District, so I was really quite surprised just how picturesque that area is, and it's actually full of mountains. And The biggest one being Scafell Pike. It is actually, though, quite remote. It's not next to any sort of major areas. It's not next to any major towns. It does involve, in this case, a drive along a single track path to a campsite right at the bottom of Scafell Pike, which is actually run by the National Trust. So I stayed there overnight, and then the next day, again, there's a nice track to follow to go up the mountain. So I went up Scafell Pike, and this particular day, the weather was much, much better. It was quite sunny. There was no clouds. On Snowdon, the top was engulfed in clouds, so there was not really much of a view. There was further down the mountain, but at the top. But certainly, Scafell Pike was much, much better. Got some great views at the top. In fact, I actually watched some RAF fighter planes flying below me, actually, along the valleys, which was quite cool to watch. They were training. What I did find, though, in the literature was there was a lot of SOTA activity. I think that's because there are so many mountains. And I heard, just while I was in the camper van, and I should have mentioned before I set off, I actually installed into the camper van a radio, because I thought that might be useful. So I'd installed my ICOM IC2730, which is a radio that I had in a previous car that I had, which is kind of going spare. So I thought, well, let's fit that into the camper van. So I spent a bit of time, and I mentioned before on the podcast, getting that into the camper van, had the ARRL on there. So that was quite nice, having that on in the camper van just to listen and see how I could work. And I did actually work a few contacts while I was in the Lake District that were actually on SOTA summits. So it did seem to be a lot busier there in terms of activity. So that was quite nice. So I thought, well, having been up Snowdon and just with the handheld, and also having heard quite a lot of activity on SOTA in the area, I thought I would just take the handheld up Scafell Pike. So, like I say, followed the path. It's not quite as high as Snowdon. Scafell's a little bit not quite as tall, but still quite a long walk and still quite a steep walk to get to the top. So managed to make that in a few hours. And like I say, it was a really nice day. There was some really fantastic views from the top because the weather was really quite clear. And called CQ. And what we found at the top of Scafell, and actually the same as at the top of Snowdon, is there is a big pile of stones. There's a big cairn upon which they place the trig point, which is where the kind of point of the summit. And of course, we find below this cairn, that cat's kind of blocking the signal for me. So I started off on one side of the mountain at the summit and called CQ, and I managed to work about 6 contacts, which was great. So I'd already managed to activate the mountain because I'd made my 4 contacts. I then thought, well, I'll just see who else I can, see if this is actually blocking my signal in that direction. So I actually went around the other side of the summit and called CQ, and lo and behold, worked another 6 contacts. So I actually managed to work 12 contacts from the summit of Scafell. Now, we always say on our courses, our training courses, that on VHF, because this is on the 2 meter band on 144 megahertz, you're not benefiting from the ionosphere. You're not able to go beyond or not much further beyond the horizon. But of course, the higher up you are, the further you can go. And surprisingly, one of the contacts that I made from Scafell Pike was one of the same contacts that I'd worked from Snowdon, and he was actually in Wales. So I actually looked at where he was based. He was actually over 100 miles away, and I'd worked him on a 5-watt handheld on a little rubber duck aerial. So I was actually really quite pleased about that. That was quite an achievement to be able to make. It just sort of proves that theory is correct. You can, the higher up you are, the more of the horizon you can see, you really can work some quite long distances. So that's quite cool to work that sort of distance on just 5 watts on FM on a handheld. Of those 12 contacts, 2 of them were at summit to summits because the other folks in the Lake District were on other summits. So that was great as well. So some more contacts in the log from Scafell Pike. Made our way down, and then essentially was now planning to go to Germany, to Friedrichshafen. So I drove home, and I was then taking the Euro tunnel to Friedrichshafen. Now, Friedrichshafen from my house is 650 miles. It's quite a long journey, so I decided to do it break it up into two chunks. So set off. In fact, I actually stayed overnight in a campsite not far from the Channel Tunnel. Just so the next morning, because I had an early start, so I didn't have to get up, too early and do a big journey. So I stayed there. Next morning, got up fairly early, drove down to Folkestone, and essentially got on the Euro tunnel, which essentially is a tunnel that goes under the English Channel across to France, for those that are not familiar or perhaps not in the UK. So the way the Euro tunnel works is that you actually drive your car or van or whatever you're in onto a train, and the train then goes through the tunnel. At the other end, you drive off, and away you go. So that was what I did. It was pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's some passport checks and that sort of thing that happen, as you'd expect, because you are going through different countries. And they had to check things like the gas on the camper van was turned off, because that, obviously safety is a big priority on for that operation. So that was pretty straightforward. I drove into France, and then about halfway through France, I booked a campsite in a place near a place called Rheims, which is about halfway. Stayed there overnight, and the next day carried on to Germany and into Friedrichshafen. So, like I say, it's quite a long journey. It's about 650 miles altogether. Got to Friedrichshafen, camped. So at Friedrichshafen, they actually have a campsite pretty much at the event. So it's really a converted car park, which is quite large. And there were lots and lots of other amateurs. As you can imagine, this is the biggest amateur radio event in Europe. And lots of amateurs were there, camped up as well. So, unfortunately, you can't actually book a place there. You just have to turn up and hope for the best. So, thankfully, when I arrived, there was plenty of space. In fact, I think throughout there was plenty of space. I don't think there was any issues with space. But, managed to get myself parked up there, camped up. Obviously, we've already done some features about the event at Friedrichshafen and the interviews that we did. The campsite was actually right next to the Zeppelin facility, so literally across there's a fence between the car park that we were camped in and the Zeppelin terminal. And then all day long you would see people going up in pleasure flights in the big airships there. So that was pretty cool as well. So I also taken as well on the back of the camper van a bike which I had, which is actually quite useful, because when you're in a camper van and once you've got everything set up, you don't really want to be having to disconnect everything. You've got to plug in the power and level the thing on ramps and that sort of thing, fill up with water, make the bed, this sort of thing. So it's a bit inconvenient to have to undo all that if you want to go out somewhere, because the Messe, where this is the big facility where the Friedrichshafen event is held, isn't in the centre of the activity there. It's not in the centre of Friedrichshafen. There's no restaurants or food places or anything like that nearby. So I found it very convenient to just get on the bike. It was about 3 miles from there into the centre of Friedrichshafen, where they have the lake and the bars and the restaurants and that sort of thing. So I would cycle down there and do all that. So that was quite handy as well for getting around. So did that. Spent 2 days actually at the event, met up with Ed. In fact, 3 days, at the event. I met up with Ed, we did all the interviews, had a great time, spoke with, as you heard, lots of different interesting people, spent a bit of time in the town, etc. So that was really good. And then once that was over, I kind of drove back in reverse, went to the campsite, the same place that I'd been on the way there, went to the tunnel, and again, took that back, took the camper van through the tunnel on the train, and then arrived home. And so that was kind of this point. I'm probably now about 4 weeks into my trip, having done all that and a few other bits. So the final leg now was to go to Scotland. Now, I live in the south of England, and Scotland is quite a journey. And my plan was to go up Ben Nevis, as I said, which is the highest mountain in the UK, and to try to activate that. But driving all the way to Fort William, which is the nearest town to Ben Nevis, it's quite a long journey. So actually, again, I decided to break it up into two parts. So I stopped off in the Lake District, not far actually from Scafell Pike, thinking about it. And then I continued my way up to Scotland. However, this is where I had the first problem. When I set off from the campsite, I was about 5 minutes setting off. I'd got onto the highway to go up to Scotland, and suddenly the sound from the engine dramatically changed, and the camper van sounded like a tractor. And there was obviously a big problem. So I quickly Googled a garage and drove around to a garage nearby, and they had a look at it for me, and they said, yeah, it sounds like there's a problem with the exhaust, but unfortunately they weren't able to look at it that day. They were very busy, so I was kind of stuck. And I guess one of the downsides of having a camper van is, well, it's also not only your method of transport, but it's also where you're living. So you can't leave it at a garage somewhere because you got nowhere to stay. So I drove around a few of the garages, and it was kind of the same story. There was no availability to look at it. So I do have, through my vehicle insurance, I do have breakdown cover through the AA. The AA is one of the breakdown services here in the UK. So I rang the AA up, expecting to be towed home, expecting that they're going to say, look, this needs to go to a garage to be fixed, and we're going to have to tow you back home, and that would kind of be the end of my holiday, end of my trip. So rang up the AA and waited about an hour, which is pretty normal for the man to turn up. He said, yeah, okay. So, and in the meantime, I had a look under the van, and I could see that the exhaust pipe had fractured at the point where it connects to the engine through the manifold. So I thought it looked like a big problem. So I showed the picture, because I took a picture of it on my phone, to the guy, and he said, yeah, obviously the exhaust has got a problem, but he said I might be able to fix that. I thought, okay, this sounds pretty good. So he jacked up the car, or the van, sorry, and he had some axle stands and things for safety, and had a good look underneath. And he goes, yeah, okay, well, let's see what we can do. So he actually took the exhaust off, for the front part of the exhaust, the front pipe, and made a few phone calls. He obviously had some good contacts in the area, and said, can you weld this for me? And some guy said, yeah, probably can do that. Or he then rang up a car parts supplier and said he got a Fiat Ducato front exhaust pipe, and the answer was yes. So we jumped in his van, drove down to this parts place. I think it was about £30 I paid for this pipe. Got back, and he fitted the part. So basically the van was fixed, and I was really happy at this point, because I could now continue my journey. So top marks to the AA. I was very pleased, and it wasn't what I was expecting. So they definitely met my exceeded my expectations that day. So that was really good. So anyway, I was then able to continue my journey north. Went up to Fort William, or to actually a place called Glen Nevis, which is the bottom really of Ben Nevis. So camped there for the night. The weather forecast was actually pretty bad. It was raining when I arrived. The forecast was for it to rain the next couple of days, and I was only there for 2 days, so this wasn't brilliant. But I decided I wasn't going to go up the next day. It was going to rain all day according to the forecast. So I spent a bit of time in Fort William, which was quite a nice place, and decided to go up the day after. So the day after, what I did do though, the day before, was to go to the Ben Nevis Visitor Centre, and they have information there about what to do on the mountain, and they had some leaflets which I took away, which tells you about things like what to do in an emergency, what sort of things to take with you, etc. And that turned out to be quite a useful thing to have. So I actually made sure I had all the items on the list in my backpack. So things like, I mentioned other things like the first aid kit, the flashlight or torch, the spare clothing, food, all those things, a mobile phone, etc. And then the next day I went up Ben Nevis. So this was by far the hardest of the three mountains that I was going up during this 6 weeks. It's about 4 hours up and about another 4 hours to get down. So it's a good old long day on the mountain, and it's pretty steep. And of course, it was also a wet day, which wasn't really very good. Now, on the way up, to be fair, the rain didn't start probably until about 3 hours in, and Ben Nevis is quite, it's not, we're not talking world-beating, world records, but for the UK, it's the highest mountain. It's 4,400 feet, or about 1,345 metres, so it's quite high, and it's surprising what difference it makes from the bottom to the top. Even though it was a bit windy and a bit wet at the bottom, it was actually a lot worse at the top. It was really quite cold. In fact, I'm glad I was carrying my gloves, because my hands were like blocks of ice at the top. It was really quite wet and windy and cold, and at the top it was you literally just in cloud, because it is pretty high up, and it's very common apparently at Ben Nevis to be summit to be, you're getting no view at all. In fact, it was so cloudy, it's quite difficult to actually navigate. I did use the app. I mentioned the app earlier, which gave me had the map on it. And again, I had the map as well, the paper map, in case that didn't work. But that was really good, because it told me precisely where I was on the mountain. And the visitor centre does warn you that there are some quite dangerous drops from the mountain if you're not careful. You're not really sure where you are. Just be very, very careful, because it is... there are some quite dangerous cliffs you could literally just fall off or slip off if you're not sure where you are. And I did see some of those. In fact, at the top of Ben Nevis, even in July, there is snow up there. Not everywhere, but I did see snow about the place. So it is pretty cold and pretty wild, shall we say. So, and I did see the side of a cliff that I can imagine somebody's falling off if they weren't very, very careful. And like I say, it was very misty. And there is, to help navigate, there are some piles of stones or cairns that you can follow about every 50 or so metres. You follow this path to the summit. And it was actually quite difficult to see the next one in parts because of the amount of cloud essentially that you were trying to see through. So I made it to the very top. Now I decided with Ben Nevis, it was having previously gone up Scafell Pike and Snowdon, that I wasn't going to take with me, and I did think about this long and hard, that I wasn't going to take with me my HF gear because it was going to be pretty tough anyway, and taking with me the additional weight of the battery, the radio, and the other bits, the aerial and the fishing pole would have made it much, much harder. And with thinking back, it probably makes sense really for, if you're going to do something like Ben Nevis and you want to work HF, don't go on your own. You need at least, I would say, 3 people to carry the kit up there. Doing it on your own will be really hard work unless you're extremely fit, a lot fitter than I am. Then I wouldn't suggest that's a good idea. So anyway, I just had the handheld with me. So when I got to the top, I took my gloves off, which were it was pretty cold, and it was raining and wet, and it was kind of raining sideways at the top, so it was pretty horrible, to be honest with you. I called CQ, and I called CQ, and I called CQ, and I got absolutely no response whatsoever. I had a little chin around. I did hear a couple of people having a conversation on 2 metres. I tried to break in, and they either couldn't hear me or they ignored me. So that was a bit frustrating. I went back to calling frequency and call CQ again, and actually somebody did come back to me, or I think he came back to me. It was a mobile station, and then he vanished. So basically, in terms of the radio, that was a disaster. I didn't manage to activate Ben Nevis. I decided that I wasn't going to spend an awful lot of time trying to sit there calling CQ. I was getting quite cold. It was pretty wet and windy and wild, and I decided that actually that wasn't a lot of fun, and it wasn't worth getting hypothermia or not being very well just for the sake of activating a mountain. So I decided to put the radio away and make my way down. So I started to descend. The weather was pretty nasty at this point. So, and again, as it was on Snowdon and on Scafell Pike, it was very busy. There were quite a few people at the top and quite a few people that are, on the way up and down the paths. As I made my way down, it was about 4 hours to get to the top, and I'm quite slow actually going down. It may have taken me even longer to get down actually because my knees are not great. So I made my way down, and I got to around about half an hour from the bottom, and I came across a group of people, one of whom was sat on the floor, and I thought, well, that's a bit unusual. So I stopped and had a chat with them, and turns out it was a family, and the young lady had fallen and thought she'd broken a leg. Now that's quite serious on a mountain because you can get hypothermia or anything. You don't really want to sit in there getting cold. So I tried to do what I could to help. I got my survival bag out, which is this big orange polythene bag, which she couldn't move because I genuinely think she had actually broken the leg because it was pointing the wrong way. I think it was actually her ankle that had broken, but her foot was pointing in the wrong direction. She was in a lot of pain, and she really didn't want to move. And I'm a first aider. I've been on many first aid courses, and those are the classic signs of a broken bone. And certainly, I wasn't looking to move her at all. That would make things potentially a lot worse. So my concern was that she was getting quite cold. She was shivering. So I actually had to do what I could to keep her warm. Now, she was wearing the right sort of gear. She was wearing waterproofs, etc. But she was still pretty cold. So I got my spare clothes out and put those over her. I got a foil blanket out from my first aid kit, put that over her, and then I put over. I opened up. I kind of split open the survival bag and put that over her as well to kind of make her waterproof. So because the rain was coming down at this point quite heavily. So Mum had already called the ambulance. Although, having read the leaflet that I mentioned earlier from the visitor centre, it actually says the procedure to call that mountain rescue is actually to call the police, not the ambulance. And in fact, it can actually slow things down because it may take a while for the ambulance service to realise that they're not able to attend that part of the world, because obviously you can't drive an ambulance up Ben Nevis. So I suggested that we should call back and call the police, which is what my mum did, and they contacted the mountain rescue. We waited about, I'd say about an hour, and to be fair, mountain rescue are all volunteers. They're not just sat around waiting for calls. They are all probably at home, following their lives. And I imagine they get a phone call or a page or some sort of message to say there's been a problem. Can you come and help? And so, to be fair, it was half an hour from the bottom to walk. So actually, to get there within the hour was pretty impressive. So they arrived. They were extremely organised and took over, and to cut a very long story short, they sorted her out. They got her on some good pain medication. I think they're sort of gas and air type scenario, and they got her down the mountain. They got her onto a stretcher, and they essentially, once they were on that, they were gone. I couldn't keep up with them. They were kind of got to the bottom, so they were extremely impressive and did a very good job. So one thing to take away from this is that when you see the leaflet and says please take this equipment, there's a very good reason for that, because actually it's highly likely you're not going to need to use it, but if you do, actually it can be really, really important. That can make the difference between somebody having or not having hypothermia, for example. Like knowing how to call it mountain rescue is also quite an important thing. So yeah, do take heed of those warnings, and it did actually bring home to me that mountains can be quite dangerous, and you really should follow the advice. So it was good that they arrived. It wasn't good that also what happened had happened, but at least the right people came out and were able to help, and she was fine. And in fact, I got an email from her a few weeks later to say that yes, it had broken, her ankle had broken, and she was on the mend, which is good. So that was Ben Nevis. I then got to the bottom, and then I decided to do some travelling around the north coast of Scotland. So I took the camper van up to John O'Groats. John O'Groats is the very tip of Scotland. It turns out it's actually not the most northerly point of the UK on the mainland. It's actually a place called Dunnot's Head, which is actually very close to where I was staying. So I actually went to that, which is the very, very north, as far as you can go until you hit the sea, basically, in UK mainland. So I went there, and then I drove down to Edinburgh. Now, to my astonishment, in my mind, being someone that lives in the south of England, Edinburgh is a very long way away and is about as north as you can go. It's not. It was 6 hours to drive from the very north of Scotland to Edinburgh, and then a further 6 hours to get to the north of England, and then from there back home. So that was my journey home, and that was the end of my adventure. So that was pretty much my 6 weeks off. It was fun. Didn't manage to achieve everything. As you heard, Ben Nevis, the activation didn't work, but with hindsight, would I have done anything different? Probably not. I wasn't going to take up the HF gear, and I did. I think I made the right choice by stopping and not calling CQ, because otherwise I just got very cold, and chances are I probably wouldn't have managed to activate the mountain anyway. And I think the reason for that is that Ben Nevis is in a much less populated area. Snowdon seems to be, even though it's not that dense and populated, there's quite a few people out there with radios. I found I did listen around on 2 meters while I was on the campsite, and there were quite a few folks operating there, but that wasn't the case. Scotland seemed to be fairly quiet when it came to radio. The Lake District was pretty busy, as I was saying, with SOTA summits and lots of activity there, but Ben Nevis and Scotland seemed to be pretty quiet. So I suspect if I'd have kept calling CQ, I probably wouldn't have got very far. So actually, I think I made the right choice to abandon that one. But overall, it was a lot of fun. A few things went right, a few things went wrong, but none of it was. Everything ended up okay in the end, shall we say? In the end, I'd actually driven over 4,000 miles when I looked at the my records, and of course that was fairly expensive in diesel, because at the moment, with various things going on in the world, the price of fuel has gone through the roof. So that's one downside. I think I spent over £1,000 in fuel over that 6 weeks. But overall, it was quite fun. and immensely enjoyable. So just thought I'd share that. Hopefully you found that interesting, and that's it from me.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, many thanks there to our colleague Chris Howard, M0TCH, for kindly giving us our features episode, and great to hear his travels, not only his travels around the UK, but also, of course, the fun of operating and activating SOTA stations and mountaintops, etc., on his trips around the UK. So thanks, Chris, for that very kind update from your time away from base. Now, your feedback is always very welcome, and there's many ways of getting in touch with us. And one of the more interesting ways is via our YouTube channel. So we've got lots of the old sort of video interviews, etc. we've done from previous expos, etc., and rallies, and also we obviously pop the podcast show on there as well for people who prefer to listen via YouTube. So Adam G7 Charlie Romeo Quebec contacts us, thanks us for the show. And he's asking us about radios like the Belfang radios, and his first part of the question is they approved for use for Foundation user licenses. Now, he's personally not a great fan of the radios from the Far East, and would recommend to someone entering the hobby maybe a more good new or second-hand sort of, shall we say, grade A equipment manufacturer. But he wanted to know our thoughts as well. To see what we considered would be a good idea for someone entering the hobby for maybe their first radio coming in. Now, I know from my end, Adam, personally, I think the Belfangs are potentially a great use for the more younger entrant to the hobby. Somebody who, as I say, the parents are wondering, is this a bit of a flash in the pan, and it doesn't, as say, commit the parent to a huge spend going forward, and gets them on the air very, very simply, for that side thing there. But maybe, I say, it might be more of a horses for courses selection in terms of the type of handheld radio, the first radio that a new amateur has when they come into the hobby.
Certainly is, Colin, and hi, Adam. I'll probably be with Adam tomorrow at the rally, the grand field day that we're going to, and thoroughly enjoying to see Adam there. My feelings, sometimes it's probably better to have a new radio than a second-hand one, unless you know the parentage of the second-hand radio. Very few radio dealers will actually purchase second-hand handy talkies. And the reason for that is that they can suffer all sorts of abuse. They can be dropped, all those sort of things. So very rarely do people do it. And secondly, a battery can cost you quite a fortune if it has to be replaced, certainly on some of the more upmarket manufacturers. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, Adam. I'm guessing, I know where you're going from. Is the Baofeng type approved? I've got to say there are probably so many of those in the market now, and I know mine's got a CE mark on it, whether it's China International or whatever, or China Equipment, or the proper CE mark. I'm not 100% sure. But, yeah, I think the Baofangs fit a niche in the market. If I was a parent with a youngster coming into the hobby, I wouldn't want to spend £300-400 on a walkie-talkie or a handy talkie, because I would think, let's see how it goes. And so £20-30 on a Baofeng is a far more sensible move for a parent. That's where I'm going to end on that one, Colin. Back to you.
Yeah, I suppose the other one as well is whilst the Baofengs can be quite a nice entry point for a parent. Again, maybe somebody coming into the hobby who maybe isn't flush with cash, maybe a Wusong might be better than a Baofeng if they can stretch that a bit further as an adult, given something that's maybe a little bit more rounded in its design and its capabilities, which sort of maybe finds middle ground. I think it's the same with everything. I mean, I go back to with this sort of conversation, buying football boots, soccer boots. You can buy them for £20. You can buy them for £200, £300, £400. Somewhere along the line, you've got to make a decision where you put the value. And I think it's probably sometimes with people, it's probably best to find out their value level and then help them buy what's suitable for them based upon the value level. And then I suppose the other thing as well, is we haven't touched on as well, is also what's repeaters or what's connectivity that is available there and what they're going to operate as well. Do you only need a 70SEMS handheld because that's the only repeater in their area, or do they need 2 meters? Are they talking about the D-Star stuff, etc., the digital stuff? So there's a lot of questions to it. I suppose what we're saying is that the Baofangs have filled a market for some people. But as I say, there are a lot of options, and maybe it might be first off finding value first, or finding their price point, and then as obviously pitch the radio based upon usage from there, and maybe let the user make the decision accordingly. So maybe not a full answer, Adam, for you, but certainly lots of food for thought for you, and the right things. And I'd say that sort of advice really does apply to most things in life, as I say. Now, Dad, you mentioned to me as well you wanted just to clear up a small mention in the news round table about a name of one of the rallies you were discussing.
Yes, certainly did, Colin. I mentioned that I was going for the Grand Day Out on this Sunday, which is the Sunday we release. For those of you who might live in the southeast of England, this is happening at a place called Ashford in Kent. It's not a grand day out. Well, it will be a grand day out because, trust me, I'll enjoy it. But the rally's actually a grand field day. It's called a grand field day. Interestingly, guys, it is free to get in, free parking, free if you want to set up a table. It's all free. All the organiser asks is please don't bring drink and food with you, because they get the field for free. The society that owns the field is the Windmill Society, and they run a cafe, and anything they take across the bar helps run their windmill. So I said bar, I should have meant the cafe table, but you can certainly get eats there, you can certainly get plenty of drinks there, and last year it was a really good day. So if you miss it, put it in your calendar for next year. Back to you, Colin.
Yep, as I say, I mean, I'm sure it still will be a grand day out for everybody. So, enjoy that day out for now. Now, we mentioned when we were talking about Adam's question there about digital access and digital connections, etc. And as you guys are probably more than well aware now, is the ICQ podcast digital group is available for you to log on to, available for multiple different protocols, etc. for you to enjoy and only catch up with potentially your favourite presenters, but also talk to fellow, listeners to the ICQ podcast as well. You can find out more about this project by visiting our website, icqpodcast.com. As I click on the digital group link there, and it will give you all the information you need to be able to connect onto the service from there. So we look forward to hearing you on the digital group. Now, while you're on that website, you can show the value you've received in today's show and, support the efforts that we do here at the ICQ podcast. So you can do what Scott Wright, Kilo Zero Mike Delta and Richard 5B4 Alpha Juliet Golf did, and show value to the show by sending us a donation to help us out with our running costs, etc. The easiest link to do it is go to icqpodcast.com/donate, and as you know now, it keeps our show advert free, pays our way on the internet, and keeps us doing the job that we love to do every fortnight for you by bringing you the show. So please do consider, if you've got something from the show today, of popping onto that website and choosing one of the many options or finding value there yourself and send it our way. Lastly, we'd like to thank Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo for joining you, Dad, on the news round table. And that just about wraps up everything. So as I say, our episode 382 is done. I can confirm that our next episode I will be bringing to you from the sunny climes of Portugal. So as I say, we'll be producing that next show on the road. So fingers crossed. Hopefully everything goes well. Everything's tested, so we'll keep our fingers crossed there. But as I say, just in case, Dad, you need to swing into action and bail me out, I need you to make Mum a lovely cup of tea and then get a few biscuits ready to go, just in case I need to do a bit of extra work for me in a fortnight's time. So maybe you can have a scurry in the cupboard and see what you can find.
Yeah, okay, Colin. Well, I'm just about to make your mum a nice cup of tea. We'll find a chocolate biscuit for her as well, which is good news. And the Grand Field Day. Mrs. B is intending to be at the rally with me tomorrow. So those of you who do go to that rally or listen, she will be there. And as I say, we're looking forward to it. I'll leave you in peace, Colin, and say 73s to you.
73s, and catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.